Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? Admin sent a job coming to you guys here today with another Magic the Gathering instructional video. So, in today's video, we are going to be doing a practice session of Sealed with 6 Gatecrash booster packs that I have right here. So, all 6 of them are sealed. I also have some basic lands here that we're going to use for our deck. For you guys that don't really know a whole lot about Sealed, it's a limited format of Magic the Gathering that is very commonly played at some bigger events, but more so than anything like pre-release events whenever a new set's coming out. Also, some FNMs will have like sealed and drafting, which are two types of limited formats. Drafting goes into a lot of different specific types of drafting, but more generally, drafting and sealed are going to be the two limited formats that we have here, where you're just making a deck out of the cards that you have, out of the packs that you open or draft. So in this case, like I said, we have 6 packs of Gatecrash that we're going to be opening up here. I'm going to go through and we're going to look at the cards that we have in here. I'm going to try to make the best deck possible with the cards that we have. And this is going to be some practice for both all of you viewers out there as well as for myself, because I have Grand Prix Pittsburgh coming up later this month in March of 2013. So it's always good to practice before events and have some like actual physical packs in front of me, as opposed to drafting on Magic the Gathering online, which is something that I enjoy doing, but I rather prefer playing in a real kind of like mock event where I have real packs, physical cards in front of me, and work with that. So we are going to open these up here in a second, and then we're going to just kind of like take a look at what we have, break down our different colors, and I'll walk you through the steps that I take whenever I'm playing Sealed. So the first thing to do is to just crack these packs open and take a look at what we have inside. So we're just going to do that. I'm just going to open these on up. So I'm just going to have all of these opened up first, and then we're going to go through the cards. So right off the bat, like Warmind Infantry is it's like a really good filler card. I like that. Towering Thunderfist isn't bad either. I've played with him quite a few times in Limited. Basilica Screecher is awesome for Extort and Orzhov. Cloudfin Raptor, again, another really solid flyer for a cheap amount of mana. And the nice thing about Gatecrash and Return to Ravnica as well is that the cards and the set in general are going to kind of force you or kind of motivate you to play multiple colors, at least 2 colors. So you always want to be playing like 2 colors as a minimum, 3 colors possibly if you have like really good stuff in 3 different colors there. In our last pack here, I'll open this on up. Alright, so then we have the Spire Tracer as the top card here. So the thing that I like to do whenever I have all of my packs opened is I like to sort them. So I'm going to just sort them by color, and then I'm going to have like multicolored in a separate pile as well. And we're going to take a look at like the separate guilds and how cards are going to be interacting, what's worth splashing and stuff like that. So we're going to just kind of separate these all up and see what we have. So we have our multicolors, have a blue card, Ember Beast, I like that card. Guild Gates are also fairly important as well. We want to have the fixing, and Guild Gates are an extremely good way of being able to do it. Wildwood Rebirth, Foundry Street Denizen, Denrova Horror, we have an Urban Evolution, Gateway Shade, Watery Grave. So we have a dual land. We have a shock land for us here. Watery Grave is pretty solid. So that's another source of fixing for us. We also have a foil Verdant Haven, which is pretty cool. So we'll put that over here. We have a basic land. We have a Cleric token, which may or may not be relevant to us. Basilica Screecher, Disciple of the Old Ways, Massive Raid, removal is good. Metropolis Sprite. Shattering Blow, which I'm not all too impressed with. Death Cult Rogue, which is... I'll put that aside. I guess I'll put the hybrids aside as well. I just kind of grouped them together, but those were the only hybrids that we have. Hybrids are a little bit more flexible for decks just because it allows you to pay either like one mana or the other, so they end up being a little bit more flexible. Another Verdant Haven, so I really like the Verdant Havens right off the bat because they allow you to play multiple colors, and it's oftentimes the reason why I play like 5 colors in Limited, although like 5 color decks are a little bit harder for newer players to be able to build around, but if it permits me to actually build one, it would be interesting to see how I would do that. In front of the camera, at least. Aetherize is another card that I really like. Crown Ceratok is pretty good. Undercity Plague is another one of our rares. So, pretty solid Cypher card. Forces our opponent to lose 1 life, discard a card, and sacrifice a permanent. Unfortunately, it doesn't force them to like sack creatures or something specifically. Ooze Token, Cloudfin Raptor, yet again another Raptor. Predator's Rapport. Hydroform, we have a Grizzly Spectacle, which I like for black, Bomber Core, Midnight Recovery, Last Thought, Dimir Guildgate, Naturalize, Cursed Confession, Skullcrack, which is alright. It's not like overly amazing, but it's still pretty good. We have a Killing Glare, which is removal, Merciless Eviction, which is another rare for us, which is like essentially a board wipe for us. We also have a Foil Mortis Strider, so that's, I mean, I'm not impressed with this card at all. I like it in extort decks where like you're just able to keep on swinging with it, and if like they end up swinging, like you swing with it, they end up blocking it and it just dies and it gets returned to your hand, you get to recast it and hit into a lot of extort cards, but I'm not impressed with this card other than that. Then we have a Mountain Zip card, we have another Towering Thunderfist, another Basilica Screecher, so that's already giving me hope for something Orzhov-ish. Shattering Blow again. Drakewing Krasis, Slate Street Ruffian. Orzhov Guildgate, that's pretty nice. Adaptive Snapjaw, Bomber Core, Midnight Recovery. Last Thoughts, Frenzied Tilling. Mark for Death isn't bad. Bane Alley Broker. Boros Reckoner, that's awesome. Boros Reckoner is always really solid. 3/3 for triple Boros, and whenever he's dealt damage, he gets to deal that much damage to target creature or player, and he can gain first strike for 1 red or white. Boros Reckoner is enormous, especially in Limited. It's a really tough card to deal with. We have a Soldier Token and a Forest. We have Spire Tracer, Shadow Slice. Not a whole lot of like impressive stuff. There's like some decent stuff. Like I like the Basilica Screechers so far that we looked at. Purge the Profane. We have a Shamble Shark. Another Guildgate, which is awesome. So Simic Guildgate, Zerachi Tiger. Not a whole lot of white, as you guys can see. Bomber Core. Court Street Denizen. Wildwood Rebirth. Another Dimir Guildgate. Viscopa Guildmage. Serene Remembrance, Hellraiser Goblin. Biomass Mutation is another rare here, so creatures you control become XX until the end of the turn. Not a bad late game style card. We have a Mountain, we have a Horror, Warmind Infantry, Scatter Arc. We have a Smite, which I like. Our white's not huge, but it's definitely still there. We have Croconura, which I love that card because it just works in anything where you're playing green. Croconura is just really solid. Shattering Blow again. Death Cult Rogue. Put that over here. Furious Resistance. Forced Adaptation. Millennium Gargoyle. Shielded Passage. Boros Charm. Boros Charm is solid. Put that over here. We have Voidwalk. Miming Slime. We have Lazov, which is just sick nasty. Lazov is a legendary creature for us, 3/3 for 4 double blue, double black hexproof, and whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you can have him become a copy of that creature, except its name is still Lazov, and it's a legendary creature in addition to its other types, and it gains hexproof and this ability. Lazov is really enormous as far as Limited goes. He's really tough to deal with, and if you're able to mill out your opponent, find ways to kill their things, etc., etc., he ends up being just really amazing. And then we have a Swamp and a Night token. So now that we have everything kind of like separated here, we can just kind of take a look at everything that we could potentially play and kind of group things based on what their power level is. Now, the first thing that you want to take a look at is what bombs that you have. There is a term used for limited, which is B.R.E.A.D, where you want to categorize cards based on if they're bombs, removal, evasion creatures, and then the A and D. Like nobody ever agrees on what A and D is. So I always just kind of try to think of it as like acceleration, and then like D's like dead drops or things that you want to like add in as filler to your deck. I just think as D of as like dead drops, just filler. The biggest thing whenever I'm looking at what colors I want to be playing, the first thing is going to be bombs. Just big, huge threats, big cards that are really powerful and will just kind of really allow you to win the game. So we have our fixing here. I'm going to move that over to the side. We're just going to kind of look at what powerful cards we have from each color here. Just move things up, kind of bring in some OCD into this. There we go. All right, so Lazov, first off, is going to be a really just powerhouse card. He is definitely a bomb for us. The Guild Mages are always pretty powerful, however, they're not bombs. Doesn't seem like we have a whole much out of our cards here. Merciless Eviction I do like, however, because it's removal. It's not like a bomb in terms of creatures or like spells that are going to affect the game, but it affects the board state because you can board wipe if your opponent has like a lot of creatures on there, especially if they're potentially threatening creatures. So Merciless Eviction would be another card to consider being in specific colors just to be able to play it. We have Hydroform, Elusive Krasis isn't bad. Then we're just kind of cycling back in. Urban Evolution is fairly good. It's worth playing. Denrova Horror is a pretty solid card. 4/4 for 6 here, 4 generic, 1 blue and 1 black. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we can return target permanent to its owner's hand. Then that player discards a card. So if they don't have any cards in their hand whenever you get the Denrova Horror onto the battlefield, you essentially get to get rid of a card because you get to bounce it back to their hand. That's the only card that they have in their hand. They have to discard it. So I actually do like this card, and it already seems like we're just going to be going for something like black, like Esper being black, blue, and white. Just based off of like Lazov's good, Merciless Eviction is good, Denrova Horror is good. But we're still going to take a look at the rest of the stuff that we have here. Like Boris Charm is really solid. I like Boris Charm and having it just because it makes your things indestructible. Makes like all of your creatures indestructible at the face of like any removal. Of course, not Merciless Eviction because it says exile. But anything that says like destroy, deal damage, anything like that, it just gets the job done. So if we're going for like blue and black, Death Cult Rogue would be good. Boris Reckoner is like a card that I just really love, but unfortunately it doesn't look like we're going to be playing it. Another Death Cult Rogue here, so that's going to be good. Coerced Confession isn't bad. It's more of a filler card, so filler is where we would be just kind of looking at after we get everything underway. Then we would kind of consider any filler cards like Coerced Confession, where it lets us potentially draw cards. It makes our opponent put the top 4 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and then we draw cards for each creature that's put into the graveyard that way. So it's not like an assured way of drawing, but it is still fairly decent. So these cards are already like, as far as the Dimir Guild goes, we already have a few cards that we could potentially play. Merciless Eviction is good for Orzhov, so we could potentially like splash white on top of Dimir and be able to play that and maybe some other cards. Let's take a look at what we have in green. Miming Slime isn't bad. I don't like it unless I have like a solid strategy around it. Like if I have like Blood Rush guys, where my Blood Rush guys are going to be already sizable after like their initial attack. Main phase 2, I can play Miming Slime and get a big creature. Forced Adaptation isn't bad either. Croconora is just an amazing card. That's one of the most solid reasons to like run green. Like Croconora is just nuts. Reach and Evolve being a 3-cost creature, 1/3 is just nuts. Spire Tracer along with Forced Adaptation, if you have like enough of them, if you have like 2, 3, maybe even like 4 Forced Adaptations, and same thing with like Spire Tracer, it makes for a pretty good Gruul deck, so that's definitely something. Adaptive Snapjaw isn't bad. Naturalize is filler. Predator's Rapport is filler, but not a very amazing one. Crown Ceratok is fairly good for Simic-based decks, so that's like another really solid card. The Verdant Havens, I know we pulled 2 of them. Verdant Haven's really good in being able to let us splash from multiple colors. So those are 2 cards that I really like playing, and those would be things that I like look out for. Disciple of the Old Ways is a good way to have like an early start for Gruul or like anything that's running green. It's not necessarily like the most amazing card, but if you can make it like big off of any other effects, putting counters on it, something like that, being able to give it first strike as well kind of gives it the more aggressive edge against other things. So Disciple of the Old Ways, if we were going for green, which I don't think we're going to be going for, would be something that we would consider trying to run here. And for white, we don't like really have a whole lot that's really impressive. Smite is good as far as white goes. Zerachi Tiger maybe as filler. I would consider that. It's same thing with like Nav Squad Commandos. If I'm looking for slots that I need to fill, if I'm like splashing white or something, these would be cards that I would try to consider adding in, especially against slower matchups. Zerachi Tiger is pretty good. If you're going like Orzhov against Orzhov or Dimir against like Orzhov or something like that, where they're not 2 matchups where like both decks are really aggressive, Zerachi Tiger lets you gain life, and it just kind of puts you up and above what your opponent's trying to do. But it's more filler than anything else. I think Smite's really good because it is removal, and that's definitely something you want to consider. Millennial Gargoyle isn't really that amazing. I'm not impressed with it, so I'm not really going to consider that very much. Warmind Infantry is more so filler than anything for me. Same with like Bomber Corps. Skullcrack is like filler as well. There's another Bomber Corps, so we already have like 3 of those. 3 of those in a Warmind Infantry. That's like not bad. Massive Raid is pretty decent as well, and we have Ember Beast. So we already we have things that are good for a base for red, like any type of red deck, but like Boros is out of reach just because we don't have the access to like enough white cards. We do have Boros Charm and Boros Reckoner, but that's just not enough. We need to have like another color that we're going to be playing around, and that's going to make Boros Reckoner a little bit harder to play around, so that's not going to be something that I'm going to be looking to do. But like Madcap Skills is pretty good as well. So we have a few things that are decent in red, but nothing that's like far too impressive. So we have that. What do we have in blue? Voidwalk, in the right decks, if you have like creatures with enter the battlefield abilities, it's a good card to have as far as exile target creature, return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So you're able to kind of like work around it, and it also has a Cipher ability as well. Scatter Arc is to counter non-creature spells, and you get to draw a card. Last Thoughts, we get to draw a card in Cipher. Again, another one there. So like Last Thoughts wouldn't be bad if we want to run it with like Dimir. However, it's something that's a little bit slower, so I'm not really too fond of it. Cloudfin Raptor wouldn't be horrible if we were able to drop it like turn 1 and make it bigger from there. It's really solid. Aetherize is really just enormous for blue. Return all attacking creatures to their owner's hands for 4 mana is really great, especially against like the Gruul and Boros decks, because they may swing with something, then you're like, all right, well, it's no big deal. I'm only taking like 3-4 life or something like that. And then they're like, all right, well, I have a big bad fatty with just a huge blood rush. And then you're like, all right, well, Aetherize. And then you don't have to worry about it. We also have Keymaster Rogue, which is a 3/2 for 4 with unblockable, but we have to return a creature to its owner's hand, or a creature that we control to our owner's hand. So Keymaster Rogue is another solid card because it has the evasion, so we can play off of Cipher with it, and it ends up being fairly solid. We could potentially play the Cloudfin Raptor, like that's not a bad card at all. Metropolis Sprite's also fairly good as far as evasion goes, so aside from bombs and removal, the E being evasion creatures would be anything that has like unblockable, can't be blocked by this, and this, flying, all of those things would be evasion. So those creatures are important because it allows us to play off of cards that have like Cipher abilities or get cheap damage in effectively. So Metropolis Sprite might be another card that we might consider playing in like our Esper type of build that we have like potentially going on for us here. So like other things that we might consider are like the Last Thoughts. Those wouldn't be bad. Spell Rupture isn't bad either because it's a counter spell that allows us to counter something as long as we have a creature out there that's of like at least some size to where it's gonna make our opponent pay X, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures we control. So that could potentially be something, but we're not gonna grab it right now. We'll just see. It seems like with the cards that we already have, like the unblockable, the few unblockable and the flying things that we have, Shadow Slice might be potentially good, letting us have our opponent lose 3 life, and it also has the Cipher, so if we can throw it onto something that's like unblockable or flying, Shadow Slice ends up being pretty good for that. So we have Shadow Slice. As far as filler goes, Slate Street Ruffian, if I can talk today, is also not bad. Being able to allow us to swing in, and if our opponent decides to block it, they have to discard a card, which isn't bad. Basilica Screecher is a card that I just love for black, and it's Extort, and it's a flying creature for 2 mana. It's a 1/2. It's really good, even if it's not swinging in. Basilica Screecher is just enormous because it allows you to effectively play around the mana that you have left over in surplus, and you can just start draining your opponent's life slowly and be able to gain back some life as well to keep you in the game up against those like really rough aggro-filled matchups. So the Basilica Screecher is really nice. Killing Glare is also very good because it's removal. Removal is the second most important thing as far as playing limited and playing Magic goes. So Killing Glare is really nice, lets us destroy target creature with power X or less. Midnight Recovery, I'm not far too impressed with. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand and Cipher. It's alright, but it's nothing that I really go out of my way to try to play. Grizzly Spectacle, however, again is removal, so we destroy target non-artifact creature. Its controller puts a number of cards equal to that creature's power on top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So they mill for a given amount there, but Grizzly Spectacle is really awesome just because it plays off of like a card like our Lazov, and it's going to play off of that pretty well to where if we're able to mill out something really important of our opponents, we get to have Lazov become a copy of it. So Grizzly Spectacle is cool for that. So we have that. We have Undercity Plague, which again, around our evasion creatures, unblockable creatures and everything, would be potentially really good, making our opponent lose in the turn that we're playing it and hopefully ciphering it. We would be able to make our opponent lose 2 life, discard 2 cards, and sacrifice 2 permanents. And then from that point on, it would just be 1. So Undercity Plague is something reasonable to play. We have another Basilica Screecher, which I love. Gateway Shade, which could deter our opponent from playing anything like really aggressive, and they would just try to swing in with multiple creatures. It can pump itself up by paying 1 black mana. You can pay 1 black and give it +1/+1 until the end of the turn. You can use that multiple times. But since we already have like a few, I think like 2 Dimir Guild Gates, I believe, and we also have the Watery Grave, but as far as the second ability is relevant, tap an untapped gate you control, and it gets +2/+2 until the end of the turn. So it could potentially be something pretty huge. So the Gateway Shade's something to consider. Then we have like another Shadow Slice here and 2 more, and 2 of the Slate Street Ruffians. So like the only thing out of black that I probably wouldn't play is probably like the Midnight Recovery. So we have that. Now that we kind of went through everything that we have, minus the Guild Gates and the dual lands, let's try to clean things up and take a look at what we would be playing for this type of like Esper build or Dimir Splash White build. Alright, so now we have things kind of like a little bit more cleaned up. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the Bane Alley Broker that I forgot to grab out of the multicolored cards, but this card for Dimir is actually pretty good, being able to let us draw cards, and then we have to exile a card from our hand face down, but for 1 blue and 1 black, we can return a card exiled with it to its owner's hand. So we can essentially like draw multiple cards, and we can put things that we don't need and exile them face down with the Bane Alley Broker. So I mean, it's an easy way to be able to draw more cards. So out of everything that we have, let's kind of like review what we had for our cards that we wanted to play. So Merciless Eviction was good because it's a board wipe, and if we need a reset button for the board, we are able to use it. It also lets us exile artifacts, exile enchantments, or planeswalkers. So if any of those are relevant, if our opponent has like some really just enormous enchantment that we need to get rid of, or multiple enchantments, or if they have a planeswalker that's about to go ultimate, something like that, we can get rid of it with Merciless Eviction. But if we need a reset button for creatures, we can use that as well. So Merciless Eviction is good for that. As far as the splash of white goes, Lazav was really solid for Dimir just because it lets Lazav become like a copy of another bigger creature, and it still gets the abilities of Lazav and Hexproof. Hexproof is just enormous on creatures as far as limited goes, so that's another really good reason to have him in here. Dinrova Horror was nice because it's going to allow us to return a permanent our opponent controls to their hand, and then they have to discard a card. So Disruption is always nice, and if they don't have anything else in their hand, they're pretty much forced to discard that card that they just got back. The Delph Celt Rogues are going to help us out with any Cypher abilities that we want to play around, and it also deals a cheap amount of damage pretty easily, so we can play around that and we can get in cheap damage as well as any triggers of Cypher that we want to successfully have triggered off. So that's what we have for Multicolored, on top of the Bane Alley Broker that I just mentioned. So those are all good things for Multicolored. For white, we have Smite, which is destroy target blocked creature. So if we're playing a little bit defensively, which is something that Dimir is going to try to do, they're not really an aggressive deck. And if our opponent has anything really like over-the-top aggressive, we're going to try to hold back a little bit and try to stabilize, play a Smite, or maybe even play Merciless Eviction and get rid of the board and just work our way from there. But Smite is pretty good for white as far as the splash goes. Splashing for like removal elements isn't bad at all. It's overall pretty effective, and Merciless Eviction is like a really solid reason to do it, but Smite is a fairly solid reason to have it. Also, we have like Nab Squad Commandos, which may not be used. Zerachi Tiger may or may not be used. If we need filler, we might use the Zerachi Tiger. The Coerced Confession for hybrid cards might be used as well. But as far as white goes, Smite may be played. We'll take a look at how many cards we have total once we go through everything. We have our Shadow Slice here. I think we grabbed another one. Yeah, so we have 2 Shadow Slice as 5 drops that are going to make our opponent lose 3 life, and we can use the Cypher and make them lose even more life from that point on. So those are pretty good for black. We have the 2 Slate Street Ruffians that are going to act as like filler for us, and a pretty decent filler at that. 2 Basilica Screechers that are pretty nice with flying, extort, and evasion for the Cypher spells that we can have. Gateway Shade that's able to be a whole lot bigger in terms of how much mana that we want to put into it, and if we want to like hold it back, maybe bluff that we're going to be making it bigger, and then our opponent plays like a big bomb or something, hoping to swing in next turn, and we just play a removal spell or something like that on it. So the Gateway Shade is pretty good. Undercity Plague with Cypher is pretty good. Grizzly Spectacle for removal and Killing Glare for removal are nice and blue. And then we have cards like Last Thoughts that may or may not make the deck, but draw a card and then Cypher is pretty decent. Metropolis Sprite for evasion. Cloudfin Raptor that may or may not be played, but again, it's another flying creature with Evolve that can be played around other creatures that we have, so it could potentially become somewhat sizable as far as a evasion creature goes. Keymaster Rogue with evasion, with unblockable, but we have to return a creature, which isn't all that bad. And Aetherize, which is a really, really amazing reason to be in blue for us here. It's a really solid card to have. So let's count up how many cards that we have. In Limited, we want to have a 40-card deck. As a minimum, there's no maximum that we have to have. There's like no maximum of like, oh, you can only have 60 cards or something like that. But the general ratio that you want to have is 40 cards, 17 of those cards being lands. And that may deviate from that a little bit. You may run 16 lands if your mana curve only goes up to like 5-cost cards and you don't really have very many of them if you're running a lot of like really low-cost stuff. And if you're running like multiple colors, running a lot of high drops and stuff like that, then you may run 18 lands. But for the purpose of things, like 17 is the basic, just kind of like mean to everything. It's like the center. It's where you want to start. And then you kind of assess like, oh, all right, well, I'm going to go up 1 or down 1, stuff like that. So we'll just count it through. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. So this is actually like a perfect amount of cards to have in here. 23, leaving us 17 lands that we could potentially run. So that's pretty perfect. I don't know. I mean, that seems pretty all right. The rest of the cards that we have, like, as far as things that we could potentially side in, like Nap Squad Commandos probably won't get played, even with like the sideboard or anything like that, because it's more of like a Boros-based card. But Zerachi Tiger would be like sided in for slower matchups where we could gain life and get an advantage. Coerced Confession against decks that have like a lot of creatures in them, where we can draw multiple cards whenever it comes to like turn 5 or so. We can just get advantage of being able to make our opponent get rid of cards from the top of their library and them being creatures. Scatter Arc, again, it's going to be against like the slower matchups where we counter target non-creature spell. Any, like, I don't know, like Cypher spells our opponent may have, or other enormous things that they may try to play. And then we can also draw a card off of it, which isn't horrible, but it's more of a slower card. We're not going to be playing it against aggro-based decks, especially because it can't counter creatures. So it's more of filler. Spell Rupture as well. We don't really know what our opponent's going to be playing, and our creatures aren't really that huge either. So it's a card that I would side in if it's really optimal. Some players would just play it right off of the top, just play it in the main board. However, I like to keep that and play a little bit more conservatively to where I don't know what my opponent's playing. So let's try to play it a little bit more safe and not make like a bold jump or a bold conclusion where we know that Spell Rupture is going to be good. We're going to make this assumption that Spell Rupture is going to be good. So we have those kind of like as sideboard cards that we could potentially use. And now let's take a look at what we have in terms of like our dual lands or our guild gates. So Watery Grave, of course, is going to be played because it's a dual land in our colors, and it's going to help us out a lot. We also have Dimir Guildgate, the Simic Guildgate, which won't help us, Orzhov Guildgate, which will help us with the Smite and the Merciless Eviction. Smite may be a little bit like of a jump to have like even more of a source of white. Like, we're depending on more sources of white that we want to have, but Smite is removal. Either way you look at it, it's removal, and it can potentially help you out in a unfortunate situation. So Orzhov Guildgate is going to help us out with white cards that we may potentially run. We also have another Dimir Guildgate, so we have 3 dual lands for Dimir for us here, so that's going to help us out. Then we have a Gruul Guildgate and the Simic Guildgate that we already looked at, so those are not going to be relevant to us at all. So we'll put those off to the side with the rest of the things that we pulled. And now it's going to come down to how we're actually going to calculate the land base that we're going to use for this deck. So now we are actually kind of at the tough part of deck building, which is actually determining how many lands that we want to use and what colors we want to use and how many of each land. So the first thing that I want to do every time I'm trying to build my land base is to map out the cards that I have, take a look at them based on their color affiliation, and then count the amount of mana symbols that I have. So I'm going to go down through, count the amount of blue symbols that I see here, also counting double costs as well, count each of those as 2 or 3 or however many times you see blue, then count the amount of black sources that we have, and then do the same thing for white. So I already calculated things here, so I already have how many of each we have. We have 10 sources of blue, 17 sources of black, 2 sources of white, a total of 29. From there, we are going to calculate it to where we are going to divide the amount of sources of the given color based on the total. So it's going to be 17 divided by 29, giving us a percent of 59. 10 divided by 29 giving us 34. 1 divided by or 2 divided by 29 giving us 6, and that is rounded, so it's not exact. Whenever you add these up, it's going to be off by 1%. It's going to give you 99. It's not going to give you 100. However, I'm just rounding, so it's going to be off by like a little bit, but that's not really going to throw us off in terms of calculating our mana base. As far as our mana base goes, we have 4 dual lands, being our Orzhov Guildgate, our 2 Dimir Guildgates, and our Watery Grave. Aside from that, we're going to be running 13 basic cards. So with that, we are going to take our 13 basic cards, and we are going to try and figure out from that point our percent of how much we want of each. So whenever we are done and finished with it, it's going to be 4 blue, 8 black, and 1 white. And how I found that was I took the amount of basics that we have and I multiplied that by the percent that we have, or the decimal notation of it, based on what we got for the mana color distribution. So for black, I multiplied 13 by 0.59 to get 8, which is going to be the amount, or actually it was like 7.5 something, but I rounded it up. Everything like close to like above half, like above 0.5 is where I'm going to be going up and rounding up from it. So I decided I was going to round it up from like 7 to 8, so we're going to be running 8 sources of black, so 8 swamps, aside from our dual lands. So we have 8 there, taking 13, multiplying it by 0.34 to get 4 sources of blue, and multiplying 13 by 0.06 to get 1 source of white for us, aside from the Orzhov Guildgate. So that's how I calculated this. Now, there is a much simpler way to do this. There's an app for the iPhone, for you, those of you guys that have the iPhone. There's an app that you can just type in the amount of mana symbols that you have for like each given color, and then it'll just do exactly this, and it'll give you the amount, rounded up or rounded down, of each color of land that you want to be using, excluding any dual lands that you may have. That's something that you have to factor in on your own, but it's a really useful tool to have as far as calculating mana bases goes. So it's definitely something to check out if you have an iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone, you're kind of forced to calculate things based on math, but as you can see, it's not really hard. You count the amount of symbols that you have, you find the total, you divide, you find the percent, you take the amount of basic lands that you're using, multiply it by the percent, and it gives you the amount of lands that you want to do. And this is probably going to make it a lot easier for people that haven't been doing this thus far. And it's a really simple way to just get exact mana bases based on what you want to have and the effective mana that you want to see each time going through. So we're actually going to grab them. I just tossed that aside, but I actually want to have this so I can add the appropriate land. So we have 1 source of white that we want to have here, so 1 plains, 4 sources of blue, so we want to have 4 islands here. Let's see if I can get the same artwork here, because I have a particular taste for certain artworks, and looks like I only have 2 of these that I just happened to grab. So we'll grab 2 of this artwork, just because I'm OCD. So 4 sources of blue. And then we want 8 swamps, which I know I'm not going to have 8 of the same. So, yeah, they're all just mixed here. So we'll just grab 8. 3, 6, 7, 8. Let me just count them again to make sure I didn't miscount there. 3, 6, 8. All right, there we go. So that is going to be the calculation for the land base. Just counting it back through, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Always want to make sure, double check, and make sure that you have like the right amount that you're actually going to be playing here. So that does it for pretty much the deck building portion. Now let's count up the cards that we have in the main deck here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. So 23 and 17, that gives us 40. That is exactly how much we want to be running in this deck for a 40-card deck. Now, the other thing that I mentioned before and that we want to take into consideration are the sideboard cards that we have. So like Spell Rupture, Coerced Confessions, Rachi Tiger, Scatter Arc. Those are all perfectly reasonable cards to have sided in. Of course, there's not really a whole lot much else going on for us in the colors that we have. And everything else in terms of what other possible things we could play was kind of lackluster. We didn't have a whole lot of support. This was probably the most solid thing that we could build out of the cards that we have. So let's put these off to the side. And I'm going to shuffle this up very carefully. I'm just going to pile shuffle it, and then we're just going to practice draw like 1 or 2 hands and see what we get from that. Alright, so now I have things, for the most part, shuffled up. We're going to do like another cut here. Just make sure things are like random. The reason why I wanted to shuffle it carefully and not like waste too much time is just because like we do have a few cards like Watery Grave Lazov that are worth a little bit of money, so I don't want to like scuff them up because I'll probably end up like trading them or selling them or something like that. So 4, 5, 6, and 7 for us here. Let's take a look at what this looks like for us. So we have some lands. Hopefully we don't have a whole lot more. I mean, it's not a horrible hand. I would probably keep something like this just because it has a Lazov and it also has Grizzly Spectacle. So, like, if our opponent was, like, gonna play something that's somewhat, like, decent in size, then we can play Lazov turn 4, turn 5, like, play Grizzly Spectacle, and we are able to essentially have Lazov become a copy of it. So that's not horrible. So I already like this. We have 5 lands, which it's a little bit clunky. Only having one source of blue as well. But we can try and go for it. We can play our land, pass for turn. We have Watery Grave. That's just good right off the bat there. So we play our Watery Grave. We're going to pass the turn. Our opponent may deal damage if they have like a turn 1 play, something like that. If they're playing aggressive, doesn't really matter. We draw again. We draw another land. It's kind of unfortunate, but we play our land. We pass for turn. And then we're going to draw again. We have Basilica Screecher. That's cool, but we're probably going to go tap our 4 mana, play our Lazov. He has Hexproof, can't be targeted by stuff, so that's always awesome. And then we're going to pass the turn. If our opponent has something that is going to be worth stealing in terms of having Lazov become a copy, then we can do Grizzly Spectacle. If not, we can just play the Basilica Screecher for 2 mana, and then we can like swing in with Lazov or not. Then passing like the turn, keep it going here. We have Killing Lair, which is really good. It's a removal spell. We already have like a decent amount of lands already. We can play our plains now. We have a decent amount of black sources already. So with Killing Lair, we can already hit into like a 5-drop or a 5 power creature or less. So destroy target creature with power 5 or less, essentially with the lands that we have. So we can like kill something and we can have Lazov become a copy of it. So like that's not bad. We'll gather things up here, and we're going to try and playtest another one. Like this was a pretty decent hand overall. It played out fairly well, so I mean that's not horrible. I'll try and do like a quick shuffle here, and we'll see where things go. But ultimately, the skills as far as what I showed you guys in this practice session, they can be transferred to any other set. Of course, there are going to be different cards, different mana fixing, different mechanics. However, the same skill set and the same knowledge is transferable. The same means of calculating mana bases, working with how many cards that you want to have, land count, and everything like that. It's all transferable, and you can just keep on trying to use that for different sets and different sealed events as new sets are coming out. All right, so we have that shuffled up fairly well. I'll take a look at it again. So 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And let's see here. So we have 2 lands, Shadow Slice, and then we have Merciless Eviction, Aetherize, and Orzhov Guildgate. So right off the bat, we're going to start off with our Orzhov Guildgate, and we're going to play off from there. We have another swamp. We're seeming to be getting a lot of swamps. That may just be the way I shuffled. It's a little bit biased. So we play that, and then we pass our turn. We have our Watery Grave again, so we can either pay the life for it, or we can have it come in tapped. So I don't know, for the sake of things, we take 2 life, we play Metropolis Sprite, and then we pass the turn from there, just so we can have our drop from there, and then we can use Aetherize the following turn. So we have Basilica Screecher there, that's not bad at all. We play our Swamp, and then let's assume that we pass the turn and make our opponent think the Metropolis Sprite is going to block or something like that. They swing in with their creature, and yeah, we drop that Aetherize, we get rid of their attacking creatures, put them back to their opponent's hands. Then we get our turn back here again. We have Denrova Horror, which is awesome as a 6-drop for us. We have 5 mana. We're able to play Shadow Slice, deal, have our opponent lose 3 life. We can Cipher on the Metropolis Sprite, swing in with a deal, or well, not deal, make them lose another 3 whenever it's ciphered. I always want to say deal 3 damage whenever I deal with cards like this, but for the sake of things, Shadow Slice deals 3 and then 3 again off Cipher. Metropolis Sprite deals 1. So ultimately it's going to be like 7 in 1 turn. We untap, we draw. We have Keymaster Rogue, Basilica Screecher. Those are like the only 2 cards that we can actually play here. So we can swing in with Metropolis Sprite. If we're able to get through with Evasion, then we can deal like another 3, have our opponent lose another 3 with Shadow Slice off of the Cipher. Then we can play Basilica Screecher, and then we can pass the turn. Following turn, untap. We have Slay Street Ruffian, so we can either go Ruffian or Rogue, Keymaster Rogue, depending on how much damage we need to deal to win the game. If we go Rogue, we can bounce back like Basilica Screecher, and off the trigger of Extort, we can Extort once off the Basilica Screecher, drain 1, gain 1. Goes back to our hand. We have the Keymaster Rogue, pass turn, kind of like rinse, repeat. Go off from there and work things out. Let's just see the next couple of draws. We have a swamp. So we have lands, and then we have a Death Cult Rogue. So that's not bad. That's not bad overall. It seems to be very solid, and I'm pretty confident with the deck that I have here that it will do well. At least get me fairly far as things goes. We already have like the Orzhov Guildgate there, and we have Merciless Eviction, which would help us even if our opponent has like an enormous board state where we can't really deal with it, we can't find our ways around it, we can just blow everything up. We have a reset button there. So that is our practice session of Sealed here for Gatecrash. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We pulled some awesome stuff here, and hopefully some of the stuff that I talked about here will help you out with your sealed events. If you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. I'm going to have a ton of more videos coming up, both with practice sessions, other Magic the Gathering related videos, and all that kinds of cool, fun stuff that you guys just know and love. So just want to grab a few of the rares that I have here. But until next time, guys, have yourselves a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.